All right, ready to dive deep. Today, it's The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, Robin Sharma's book. So, can a high-powered lawyer actually find happiness, lasting happiness, by trading in his Ferrari for, like, a life of spiritual enlightenment?
Interesting question.
That's what we're going to explore today. Unpack some of the wisdom in this fable and see how it might, apply to our own lives.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how Sharma uses this story within a story. It makes these complex ideas about fulfillment and purpose really accessible, I think, for a lot of people.
Right.
So we meet Julian Mantle. He's a super successful lawyer, top of his game, seems to have it all, but deep down, he's really unhappy.
Yeah, it's like that classic midlife crisis thing, but instead of a sports car, he has a heart attack.
Right.
That's a wake-up call.
Yeah.
So what happens next?
Well, Julian does something pretty radical. He sells all his possessions, his flashy Ferrari included, and heads to India. He's searching for something more, a more meaningful life. And he ends up living with the sages of Savannah, these wise folks who just seem to radiate like youthfulness and serenity.
Okay, so he goes from like $3,000 Italian suits to like robes and sandals in the Himalayas.
Basically.
That's a huge lifestyle change. What's the secret these sages have? What are they teaching him?
Well, the sages have mastered 7 virtues. They believe these are essential for a fulfilling life. And they reveal these virtues through this kind of mystical fable. And each virtue is symbolized by like a really vivid image,
Okay.
like a garden, a lighthouse, even a sumo wrestler.
Okay, a sumo wrestler. I am intrigued. Tell me more about these virtues.
All right, so the first one's all about mastering your mind.
Yeah.
And the sages, they compare the mind to a garden that needs tending, like you have to really take care of it. And they actually call negative thoughts, get this, they call them toxic waste.
Really?
Yeah, that can poison the garden. So they teach Julian about this thing called opposition thinking.
Opposition thinking. So that's, instead of dwelling on those negative thoughts you're talking about, you consciously replace them with positive ones.
Exactly, yeah. And they even suggest using something physical, like using prayer beads, as a reminder every time you slip back into that negative thinking.
Oh, interesting.
So, for example, say you're facing a challenge at work.
Yeah.
And you start thinking, I can't handle this. Instead, you try reframing it to something like, this is tough, but I've overcome challenges before. I'll find a way through this too. Each time you shift that thought, you move a bead.
I like that. That's a really clever way to make it more, tangible, like you're actually doing something. So what other techniques do the sages share?
Well, they teach this visualization technique. It's called the secret of the lake. And it's basically where you imagine your desires as if they're already happening.
Oh, interesting.
So the idea is that by vividly picturing your goals, you harness the power of your mind to help manifest them into reality. It's like you're creating this blueprint for the life you want, but it's mental.
I like that. It's like shifting your mindset from I wish to I am. It's about like believing in yourself.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what about the second virtue?
The second virtue is all about finding your purpose. It's represented by this like towering red lighthouse.
Okay, a lighthouse.
The sages, they call this dharma, and it's more than just your job or your career. It's about aligning your actions with, your values, your passions, the things that really matter to you.
That really resonates with me. But how do you figure out what your dharma is? That seems like a pretty big question.
It is a big question. The sages, they suggest, try reflecting on what brought you joy as a child.
Okay.
What activities did you lose yourself in? What were you naturally drawn to? Often, those passions we had as children can provide clues to our true calling.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and they emphasize that discovering your dharma isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing process,
Yeah.
It's about exploration and self-discovery.
So it's about like paying attention to those things that spark your curiosity and make you feel, truly alive.
Exactly, yeah. And it's about having the courage to pursue those passions, even if they don't fit into like conventional expectations. It's about creating a life that feels authentic to you.
I like that. What about the third virtue?
The third virtue, that focuses on continuous self-improvement. It's a concept called kaizen.
Okay, Kaizen. And this is where that sumo wrestler comes in, right?
Yes. The sages, they use this really striking image of this 9-foot-tall sumo wrestler
Wow.
to represent the idea that self-mastery is an ongoing process. It's not about achieving perfection like overnight. It's about making these small, consistent improvements in all areas of your life.
So instead of trying to make, massive changes, it's about taking small steps, building momentum over time.
Exactly. Think of it like a staircase. You don't try to jump to the top in one leap, right? You take one step at a time, gradually making your way up. The sages, they really emphasize that consistency is key here.
That makes sense. But what does this actually look like in practice? How do you implement Kaizen in your everyday life?
It starts with identifying areas where you want to grow. Maybe you want to improve your communication skills or become more organized, learn a new language. Then you got to break those big goals down into smaller, more manageable steps.
Right.
So instead of trying to learn a whole new language in a month, commit to learning 5 new words every day.
Uh-huh.
Instead of trying to overhaul your entire diet, overnight, start by incorporating one more serving of fruits or vegetables into your meals. Small changes.
So it's about setting realistic goals, focusing on those small improvements, but consistently over
Yeah.
time.
Yes, precisely. And it's about celebrating those small wins along the way. Each step, no matter how small, is a victory.
I like that. And I'm starting to see how these virtues build on each other, like mastering your mind, finding your purpose, that can fuel your motivation to practice Kaizen, right? To
Yeah.
keep making those improvements.
Exactly.
So what about that fourth virtue?
That brings us to willpower. And the sages, they represent this with a pink wire cable.
Okay, so I'm picturing that cable like wrapped around that sumo wrestler.
Okay, yeah.
It's a pretty memorable visual.
Yeah.
What does that have to do with willpower?
Well, the sages explain that willpower is like that cable. It's made up of many thin wires that are intertwined. And each act of self-discipline, no matter how small, strengthens those individual wires, making that cable, your willpower, much stronger overall.
So it's not about having this like superhuman ability to resist everything.
Right.
It's about training your mind to make choices that align with your goals.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's about building those muscles of self-control through consistent practice. Start with small acts of discipline, like maybe getting up 15 minutes earlier, or choosing to go for a walk instead of, scrolling on your phone when you're feeling stressed. Small things.
And the book even mentions this exercise called the vow of silence, where you refrain from speaking for a period of time, to strengthen your willpower, like those Tibetan monks.
Yes. This practice, yeah, it's inspired by those monks. It helps you to become more aware of your impulses, and it gives you this sense of mastery over your inner world. It's like a mental boot camp for your willpower.
It also highlights the difference between liberty and freedom, which I think is interesting. The book is arguing that true freedom actually comes from mastering yourself, not just doing whatever you want whenever you want.
It's a powerful concept. It challenges our typical understanding of freedom, right?
Right.
And it suggests that disciplined people are the ones who are truly free to create the lives that they want.
That's a lot to think about. We've covered a lot of ground already with these first four virtues.
Yeah, and we're just getting started. There's 3 more virtues to uncover, each offering, more insights into living a richer, more meaningful life.
Welcome back to our deep dive into The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. We've been exploring those 7 virtues, the ones Julian Mantle learns from the sages of Savannah. Starting with mastering your mind, finding your purpose, the whole Kaizen thing, self-improvement, and then, of course, cultivating willpower. Now, this 5th virtue, this one emphasizes respecting your time, and it's represented by this shiny gold stopwatch.
A stopwatch, huh?
It makes me think about, how often do we actually treat our time as the precious resource it is?
That's so true. It's easy to fall into that trap, feeling like there's just never enough time.
Right.
But the sages, they really believe that mastering your time, that's key to mastering your life. Like, they were all about planning, prioritizing these high-impact activities, even scheduling in time for self-care. Like, they actually put it in their schedule.
So it's not just about being busy, it's about being intentional.
Right.
And I remember the book even talks about adopting a deathbed mentality,
Oh, yeah.
which, I don't know, that always sounds kind of morbid to me. How do we apply that idea in a positive way?
That's a great question. It's not about, dwelling on death, but it's more about using that awareness of our limited time to kind of motivate us, to really pursue our passions and make the most of each moment. Think about it this way. If you knew you only had a year left, would you spend it stressing about things you can't control or chasing someone else's definition of success?
No, probably not.
You'd probably focus on the things that really matter, like relationships, experiences, making a difference. It's just a powerful way to shift your perspective and prioritize what's really important.
Right, you'd focus on those things that really matter to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how do we actually go about managing our time more effectively? Any practical tips from the sages?
Well, they suggest starting with planning, even if it's just taking like 5 minutes each evening to jot down, like, what are your key tasks for the next day?
Okay.
And then, level up, plan your whole week. Think of it like a roadmap for your time so you're not just reacting to whatever pops up. You're proactively designing your week.
Okay, roadmap, I like that.
Yeah, so it aligns with your values and your goals.
I have to admit, I'm not always great at planning, but I can see how it could really reduce that feeling of overwhelm. Like you're actually in control of your time, you're making conscious choices.
Exactly. Yeah, instead of just letting the day run you, you're running the day.
Yeah.
And don't forget about the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle. It suggests 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts.
Right, the 80-20 rule.
So it's about identifying those high-impact activities that actually move the needle and focusing your energy on those.
I've heard of the 80-20 rule that, applied to business and stuff. But it's interesting to think about it in terms of time management, too. So maybe instead of trying to do everything, it's about learning to say no to things, to those things that drain your energy or don't really align with your goals.
Exactly. You got to be strategic with your time and your effort. Now, the sixth virtue, that emphasizes selflessly serving others. And it's symbolized by this story of a giant. This giant undergoes a huge transformation after showing kindness to a young boy.
Okay, a giant and a boy.
Yeah.
This one feels particularly relevant in today's world,
Yeah.
where it's so easy to get caught up in our own little bubbles. What's the takeaway from the giant's story?
It highlights that inherent joy, the fulfillment that comes from just giving to others
Mm.
without expecting anything in return. It's
Ah.
about recognizing that we're all interconnected and, making a positive impact on the world around us.
It's about shifting from me to we. But doesn't that kind of go against the whole, focus on your own goals and ambitions thing? How do you balance, like, serving others with pursuing your own dreams?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's not about neglecting your own goals, but it's about recognizing that true happiness isn't just about personal achievement. It's also about those contributions we make to something larger than ourselves. Think about the people you admire most. Are they just focused on their own success? Or are they making a difference in the lives of others?
That's a good point. The people who inspire me most, they're often those who are passionate about something bigger than themselves, whether it's a cause they believe in or just, making their community a better place.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be these grand gestures, right? Just small acts of kindness, volunteering your time, even just being a supportive friend or family member. These things can make a real difference.
Right, small acts can add up.
Yeah.
And, the book also points out that Julian, despite all his professional success, he realized he'd neglected his relationships. Like he missed out on the joys of family, that genuine connection.
Yeah.
It's like a cautionary tale, reminding us that at the end of the day, it's those connections that truly matter.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance between pursuing your ambitions and nurturing those meaningful relationships, those things that bring joy and support to your life. Now, the seventh virtue. This one's all about embracing the present moment, and it's symbolized by, get this, a path of sparkling diamonds.
Diamonds, so each diamond represents
Yeah.
like a precious moment.
Exactly.
I like that visual. But how do we actually stop our minds from, racing ahead to the future or dwelling on the past?
That's the million-dollar question. The sages, they teach the importance of living in the now, letting go of those regrets, the worries, to fully experience the present moment. It's beauty, it's wonder. They actually share a story. It's about this man named Peter. He's granted the ability to fast forward through time, but he ends up wasting his whole life wishing for what's to come instead of appreciating what he has.
It's like that saying, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. But how do we become more mindful in our everyday lives?
Well, start by just paying attention to your senses. What do you see? What do you hear, smell, taste, feel right now? When your mind starts to wander, just gently bring it back.
Okay.
Even simple things like taking a few deep breaths or focusing on the feeling of your feet on the ground. These things can help anchor you to the present.
It's like hitting the pause button on all that mental chatter.
Exactly. And remember, embracing the present doesn't mean you can't have goals or plan for the future. It's about finding that balance between striving for what you want and appreciating what you have right now.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've now explored all 7 virtues. It's incredible how they all connect. Mastering your mind, finding your purpose, practicing Kaizen, developing that willpower, respecting your time, serving others, embracing the present moment. It's like a whole framework for living a more fulfilling life.
And what's remarkable is that these virtues aren't like isolated concepts, right? They influence and reinforce each other. Like mastering your mind through positive thinking and mindfulness, that can enhance your ability to focus on your purpose, manage your time more effectively.
And serving others, that can bring a sense of purpose and joy to your life. And that in turn can motivate you to develop greater self-discipline, willpower. It's like this virtuous cycle.
Exactly.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the monk who sold his Ferrari. We've uncovered these 7 virtues, this path to a more fulfilling life. But how do we take all this wisdom, all this advice, and actually apply it, make it real in our own lives?
Well, that's what I love about this book. It's not just philosophy, it gets you practical tools. Like, remember the Heart of the Rose exercise?
Oh yeah, the rose. That one involves like focusing your attention on a rose,
Right.
its beauty, its fragrance. Is that a form of meditation?
You could say that. It's about training your mind to be present, to focus. And the key is to gently guide your attention back to the rose whenever it wanders. Kind of like we talked about with the prayer beads and opposition thinking.
Right, replacing those negative thoughts with positive ones,
Yeah.
like building a mental muscle.
Exactly. And the book also suggests using affirmations, those short, powerful statements. You repeat them to yourself to reprogram your subconscious.
So if you're struggling with self-doubt, you might say something like, I am capable, or I am worthy of success. I tried affirmations, but sometimes it feels, I don't know, a little silly just talking to myself. Does it really work?
Well, think of it this way. Our minds are constantly bombarded with messages from the world, from our own thoughts. So the more we expose ourselves to positive messages, the more they start to take root. Like planting seeds. The more you nurture them, the more likely they are to grow.
That's a good analogy.
Hmm.
So affirmations, heart of the rose, opposition thinking, it's all about mastering your mind, which seems like the foundation for everything else.
It really is. And once you start to cultivate that inner peace, that clarity, then it becomes easier to set goals and take action. The book actually outlines a 5-step method for goal setting.
Okay, 5-step.
The first step, create a vivid picture of what you want. Imagine it's already happened.
I can see how that would be powerful.
Yeah.
Shifting your energy from wanting to having.
Exactly. Second, create some positive pressure to stay motivated. Tell someone about your goal, set a deadline, even make a reward system for yourself.
Accountability, right. Like, I'm much more likely to do something if I've made a commitment.
Absolutely. Third, attach a timeline. This adds that sense of urgency, keeps you focused. Fourth step, write it down. This makes it real, more tangible.
Taking it from your head and putting it out into the world.
And finally, this one's important, enjoy the process. The journey matters as much as the destination. Celebrate the small wins, find ways to enjoy the process itself.
That's so important. It's easy to get caught up in just reaching the goal that we forget to enjoy the journey.
Now, beyond those mental practices, the book also talks about taking care of your physical body. The sages of Savannah, they had a mostly vegetarian diet, lots of fresh foods.
Right, fruits, vegetables, those kinds of things.
Exactly. Julian himself felt a huge boost in energy and health after changing his diet.
So it's a holistic approach, mind and body. What about exercise?
The sages, they were all about movement, incorporating it into their daily routine, even if it was just a brisk walk.
Yeah, got to keep moving.
Ah.
And we can't forget sleep. I know I'm not at my best when I haven't slept well.
The book recommends a relaxing bedtime routine. Dim the lights, take a warm bath, maybe read a book, avoid screens for at least an hour before bed.
Right, that blue light is not helpful for sleep.
The sages also believed in waking up early, starting the day with some quiet reflection.
So setting a positive tone for the day.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of nature. Spending time outdoors can really rejuvenate your mind, body, and spirit.
It's like hitting the reset button, especially when you're feeling stressed.
And lastly, cultivate gratitude. The book suggests keeping a gratitude journal, writing down what you're thankful for.
Oh yeah, I've heard of those. It's easy to focus on what we don't have, but shifting our attention to what we do have can be powerful.
It's about appreciating the abundance in our lives. So we've covered a lot of ground, a lot of practical tools, but the takeaway is it's not about perfection. It's about taking small steps and finding what works for you.
Exactly. This deep dive into the monk who sold his Ferrari, it's been a journey, exploring wisdom, practical advice on how to live a more fulfilling life.
And it reminds us that happiness is not a destination, it's a way of being.
It's about making conscious choices, nurturing our minds and bodies, contributing to something larger than ourselves, embracing the present moment, gratitude, living with passion and purpose.
Remember, as Sharma writes, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. What will your first step be?